The first thing to go was silence. It was devoured by the pressurized hum of the cabin, a sound that vibrated deep in Lena's bones, and the fretful, hiccuping cries of her 6-month-old son, Sam. The air tasted sterile, recycled, and thin. She rocked him gently, her body a metronome of exhaustion, whispering a lullaby from her own childhood into the downy hair at his temple. Every passenger on the flight from Atlanta to Seoul was a potential enemy, a face that could curdle with annoyance at any moment. She felt their judgment like a physical weight, a second child strapped to her back, especially the man beside her. He was a statue carved from stillness, dressed in a suit so dark and perfectly tailored it seemed to absorb the light around it. He had not looked at her once, not when she'd struggled with the car seat, not when Sam had wailed during takeoff, not even now. His hands rested on his knees, palms down, a study in absolute control. Not a fidget, not a twitch. He was immaculate, from the severe, perfect line of his black hair to the polished gleam of his shoes. He smelled of something clean and expensive, like sandalwood and cold rain, a scent that cut through the stale cabin air and made her feel even more disheveled, more messy. Her life was a chaotic spill of baby formula and legal papers, while his was a straight, unwavering line. She adjusted Sam, pressing his warm, damp cheek against her own. "Sho, baby, sho," she murmured, her voice a threadbare prayer. He was all she had left of that other life, the one that had fractured and dissolved into a custody agreement signed in triplicate. Now, she was flying home, back to her parents' house, a 32-year-old woman with a failed marriage and a beautiful, colicky son, retreating to the safety of the beginning. It felt less like a homecoming and more like a surrender. It's in these moments, isn't it? When you're stripped down to your most vulnerable self, in a metal tube 30,000 feet in the air, that you realize how fragile the walls we build around ourselves really are. Have you ever had a moment like that, where the whole world shrinks to the space you and your anxieties occupy? Let me know which part of Lena's struggle you feel the most. The man's stillness was an accusation. It made her frantic energy, her constant shushing and rocking, feel loud and uncivilized. Sam, in a sudden burst of frustration, flung his small arm out, and his favorite teething toy, a soft yellow giraffe, flew from his grasp. It landed with a muffled puff on the pristine gray wool of the man's trousers. Lena's heart seized. "Oh, I am so sorry," she whispered, mortified, fumbling to reach for it. Before she could, one of those controlled, still hands moved. His fingers closed around the giraffe with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving. He held it for a beat, his long fingers a stark contrast to the cheerful toy. She noticed a faint, silvery scar that ran across his knuckles, a thin line of imperfection in his otherwise flawless presentation. He didn't just hand it back. He held it out to Sam, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes fixed on the baby. Sam, momentarily silenced by the novelty, stared back, his big brown eyes wide. Then a slow, gummy smile spread across his face. He reached out a chubby hand and wrapped it around the man's index finger. The man's hand was large enough to encircle Sam's entire fist. He didn't pull away. He simply sat there, a 6-month-old baby holding him captive. He turned his gaze from Sam to Lena, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in their depths. It wasn't annoyance. It was something quieter, deeper. Something that looked a lot like recognition. "He has a strong grip," the man said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth and quiet, with a precise, almost formal cadence. It held an accent she couldn't quite place, but it was the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. "He does," Lena managed, her own voice tight. "I'm so sorry. We're bothering you." He inclined his head, a gesture so small it was almost imperceptible. "He is not a bother." The words were simple, but they landed like a pardon. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, her smile bright but strained. She stopped, her eyes flicking to the man, and the smile faltered, replaced by a look of profound, almost fearful respect. She addressed him in Korean, her voice hushed. He replied with a single, clipped word, never taking his eyes off Lena and the baby. The flight attendant bowed her head slightly and scurried away. The interaction was over in seconds, but it changed the air around them. This was not just a wealthy businessman. This was someone else entirely. A man who commanded deference with a single word. Lena felt a new kind of unease settle in her stomach, something colder and sharper than just social anxiety. Who was he? Exhaustion is a thief. It steals your focus, your resolve, your ability to keep your head upright. Lena fought it, her eyelids feeling like they were lined with lead. Sam had finally, blessedly, drifted off to sleep, his little body heavy and warm against her chest, his breath a soft puff against her neck. The rhythmic hum of the engines was a hypnotic lullaby, and the darkness of the cabin was a comforting blanket. She rested her head back against the seat, telling herself it was just for a moment. But her body had other plans. Her head lolled sideways, and she jerked it back, a fresh wave of mortification washing over her. She could not fall asleep on this stranger, this quiet, intimidating, unnervingly still man. But the pull was gravitational. Her muscles, coiled with tension for hours, finally began to unspool. Her head drifted again, slowly, inevitably, until her temple came to rest against the firm, wool-covered expanse of his shoulder. It was solid, warm. The fabric was impossibly soft, and beneath it was the unyielding strength of muscle. She should move. She had to move, but it was like trying to swim through honey. The scent of him, sandalwood and rain, was soothing, a calm anchor in the turbulent air. Her last conscious thought was a jumble of apology and surrender. She was just so tired. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, some small, exhausted part of her felt safe. She didn't see the way his posture, already perfect, became even more rigid, as if bracing for the unexpected weight. She didn't see the fractional tightening of his jaw, or the way his gaze dropped to the top of her head, to the intricate pattern of her braids resting against his suit. He did not move. He did not shift or shrug her off. He simply sat, a living statue, becoming an unwitting pillow for a stranger and her child in the dark of a transatlantic flight. He stared out the window at the endless, star-dusted black, a silent guardian over a peace he hadn't sought but now seemed unwilling to disturb. The quiet hum of the plane wrapped around them, an intimate cocoon in the sky, sealing them in a moment of stolen, improbable rest. The powerful Korean Mafia boss, a man whose name struck fear into the hearts of his enemies, became nothing more than a place for a weary mother to lay her head. He could feel the soft weight of her breath against his neck. Kwon Min-jun had built his entire world on the principles of distance and control. People did not touch him without invitation, and invitations were never extended. His space was inviolable, a fortress built of wealth, fear, and a grief so profound it had become the architecture of his soul. Yet this woman, this stranger with tired eyes and a laugh line he'd noticed when she smiled at her baby, had breached his defenses without even trying. She had simply fallen asleep, and her son, the small, warm weight nestled between them, had curled a hand into the fabric of his shirt, anchoring himself in his sleep. Min-jun watched the flight attendant approach, her steps hesitant. He saw the question in her eyes, the offer to intervene. He gave a minute shake of his head, a gesture so small it was less a movement and more a cessation of movement. It was enough. She retreated. He was a man who moved markets, who could end a man's life with a quiet phone call, the head of the Chongryong clan, a Korean mafia boss whose very presence altered the atmosphere of a room. And he was currently trapped, not by an enemy, but by the bone-deep weariness of a young mother. He should have been repulsed, annoyed. This was a breach of protocol, a messy, human intrusion into his sterile world. Instead, he felt nothing, a strange, hollowed-out peace. The scent of her hair was of shea butter and something floral, and the baby smelled of milk and powder. It was the scent of life, uncomplicated and real. It was a scent from another world, a world he had observed from a distance but never inhabited. He remembered a different weight, a different warmth. A wife who smelled of jasmine, a future that had been erased in a storm of screeching tires and shattering glass. Grief was a cold companion. This warmth was a ghost of a forgotten language. He carefully, slowly, drew the thin airline blanket from his own seat and draped it over her and the child, his movements precise, practiced, so as not to wake them. He then returned to his stillness, a sentinel watching over their small island of peace, while outside the window, the world rushed by below, oblivious. Lena woke in stages. First came the awareness of warmth, a deep, comforting heat that had seeped into her bones. Then came the silence. Not the humming silence of the plane, but a deeper quiet. The absence of a baby's cry. The absence of a baby's weight. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through the fog of sleep. Her eyes flew open. The cabin was still dim, but streaks of dawn were beginning to paint the horizon outside the small window. And Sam was gone from her chest. Her head snapped up from the man's shoulder, a strangled gasp in her throat. Her gaze fell, and the world stopped. Sam was not gone. He was there, nestled securely in the crook of a stranger's arm. The man, Kwon Min-jun, she would later learn his name was cradling him with the practiced ease of a seasoned father. The baby was sleeping soundly, his little chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, his face a picture of serene contentment. One of Min-jun's large, scarred hands was splayed protectively across Sam's back, a shield of warmth and strength. The thin airline blanket was tucked neatly around them both. Min-jun was not looking at the baby. He was staring straight ahead, his profile as severe and unmoving as it had been hours ago. He seemed carved from shadow and morning light. It was the most shocking, disorienting sight Lena had ever witnessed. It wasn't just that he was holding her child. It was how he was holding him, with a kind of gentle, solemn reverence. He hadn't just tolerated the imposition, he had actively participated in it. He had taken her burden and held it while she slept. She stared, speechless, her mind struggling to reconcile the intimidating, powerful aura of the man with the profound tenderness of the image before her. This was an act of kindness so quiet and so unexpected it felt more intimate than a shout, more stunning than any overt gesture. He must have felt her gaze, because he turned his head slowly. His dark eyes met hers.
There was no judgment in them. No anger.
Just a calm, steady watchfulness. He slept, Min-jun said, his voice low and gravelly in the morning quiet. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a report. He had taken on the watch, and the watch had been peaceful. Lena could only nod, her throat too tight for words. The head of a powerful Korean crime family, a true mafia boss, had been her son's babysitter for half the night. The spell shattered with the click of the seatbelt sign and the cheerful, tinny voice of the captain announcing their initial descent into Seoul. The intimacy of the shared silence evaporated, replaced by the bustle of a waking plane. Lena felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. I am so sorry, she stammered, her hands fluttering uselessly in her lap. I can't believe I did that. I was so tired. Min-jun's expression remained unchanged. He simply watched her, his gaze intense, as if he were cataloging her flustered state. He made a small, dismissive gesture with his free hand. It is done. He then looked down at the sleeping child in his arms. With a gentleness that seemed utterly at odds with his formidable presence, he began to shift Sam back towards her. The movement was slow, deliberate, a transfer of precious cargo. As he moved, his suit jacket shifted, and Lena saw it again, clearer this time. A flash of ink at his wrist. Not just a scale, but the intricate, coiling body of a deep blue dragon, its eye a fleck of gold. It was a symbol of power, of something ancient and dangerous. Her breath caught. She had seen tattoos like that in movies, in documentaries about the Yakuza, the Triads, the organized crime syndicates of Asia. Her mind reeled. The deference from the flight attendant. The scars. The absolute, unnerving control. He was not just a businessman. He was something far more complicated, far more perilous. As he settled Sam back into her arms, their fingers brushed. His skin was cool, smooth, but she felt a jolt, a spark of electricity that had nothing to do with static. It was a current of awareness, a sudden, stark understanding that she had spent the night sleeping on the shoulder of a man who inhabited a world of shadows and violence. Sam stirred, murmuring in his sleep, and Lena automatically pulled him closer, her body forming a protective shield around him. The gesture was instinctual, maternal. But as she looked at Minjun, she realized the most dangerous thing in the sky that night had also been their staunchest protector. The paradox was dizzying, a truth her sleep-deprived brain couldn't possibly hope to untangle. He saw the shift in her eyes, the dawning fear. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He said nothing. He simply leaned back, retreating into his fortress of silence, leaving her alone with her child and a terrifying new reality. Landing was an organized chaos of people grabbing bags and jostling for position in the aisle. Lena, trying to juggle a diaper bag, her purse, and a waking Sam, felt a surge of anxiety. But a bubble of stillness seemed to exist around seat 2B. No one crowded them. No one bumped into them. It was as if an invisible wall had been erected around Minjun. As soon as the plane doors opened, a man appeared. He was huge, built like a mountain, with a shaved head and a face that looked like it had been in a long, losing argument with a brick wall. He wore a simple black suit and an earpiece, and his eyes scanned the cabin with a flat, professional vigilance. He bowed deeply to Minjun. "Mr. Kwon," he said, his voice a low rumble. He spoke in Korean, but the name registered. Mr. Kwon. The man nodded, and the mountain, whom she would come to know as Mr. Park, began efficiently gathering Minjun's single, elegant briefcase. It was happening. She was about to be left behind, a strange footnote in this man's journey.
She should have been relieved.
Instead, she felt a strange pang of something. Loss. Disappointment? It made no sense. Just as she was turning to wrestle with her own carry-on, a different man stepped into their space. He was the opposite of Mr. Park, slender, with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, wearing a suit that was a little too shiny. "Kwon Minjun," the man said, his tone slick with false familiarity. "A surprise to see you flying commercial. Things must be tight for the Chongryong clan." Minjun's face went perfectly, terrifyingly blank. The temperature in the aisle seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Choi," Minjun said, his voice soft.
Deadly.
The man, Choi, let his oily gaze slide over to Lena and a now fussy Sam. His smile widened. "Making new friends? You always did have a taste for the exotic. You must be careful. Attachments can be so vulnerable." The threat was unspoken but crystal clear. It wasn't directed at Minjun. It was directed at her. A warning shot fired across her bow. Lena's blood went cold. She clutched Sam tighter, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was real. This wasn't a movie. She had stumbled into the middle of a war she didn't understand, and this man Choi, this smiling snake, had just painted a target on her and her baby's backs. Minjun didn't look at Choi. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held the other man's gaze for a long, silent moment. The air crackled with a tension so thick Lena could taste it, metallic and sharp like blood. Then, with a dismissal so absolute it was more insulting than any curse, Minjun turned his back on him. He looked directly at Lena. The blankness was gone from his face, replaced by a look of grim, immediate resolve. He saw the terror in her eyes, saw the way she was shielding her son. He had brought this to her. His world, with its casual violence and smiling threats, had just contaminated hers. He had a choice. He could walk away, leave her to fend for herself, and hope that Choi's threat was just posturing. Or he could acknowledge the truth. The moment Choi had seen them together, she had ceased to be a stranger. She had become a liability, a weakness, a pawn to be used against him. His honor, the rigid, brutal code by which he lived, would not allow it. He had unwittingly pulled her into the shadows, and he would not abandon her there. He made the decision in the space of a single heartbeat. It was a choice that would irrevocably alter the course of both their lives. "You will come with me," he said. The words were quiet, but they were not a request. They were a command, an edict delivered with the full weight of his authority. It was the voice of the Korean Mafia boss she now knew him to be. Lena stared at him, her mind racing. Go with him? A man who was clearly a gangster, a powerful figure in a dangerous underworld? But the memory of Choi's predatory smile, the veiled threat against her child, was still fresh. She was in a foreign country, alone, and she had just been marked by an enemy of a man like Kwon Min-jun. He was a known danger, yes, but he was a danger that had held her son with tenderness while she slept. Choi was an unknown, smiling poison. She looked from Min-jun's unyielding face to Sam's innocent one. She had no choice. There was no real choice at all. Before she could even nod her consent, Mr. Park was there, gently but firmly taking her carry-on from her shoulder. "This way, please," the mountain rumbled, his voice surprisingly soft. And just like that, Lena and her son were swept into the powerful, perilous orbit of Kwon Min-jun. They didn't go through the main terminal. Mr. Park led them through an unmarked door, down a sterile white corridor, and into a private lounge that was all leather and smoked glass. The cacophony of the airport faded away, replaced by a heavy, expensive silence. Lena felt as if she had passed through a membrane into another dimension, a world that ran on parallel tracks to the one everyone else inhabited. A fleet of black sedans was waiting on the tarmac, engines purring softly. Mr. Park opened the rear door of the lead car, and Min-jun gestured for her to get in. The interior was cavernous, smelling of rich leather and the same clean, sandalwood scent as its owner. The windows were tinted so dark the world outside was muted, distant. Min-jun slid in beside her, leaving a careful, deliberate space between them, while Mr. Park took the front passenger seat. The car pulled away with a smooth, silent surge of power. The city lights of Seoul began to streak past the window, a beautiful, alien blur. Sam, wide awake now, was utterly calm, his eyes fixed on the passing river of light. Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was her best friend, Sarah, a frantic string of texts demanding to know if she'd landed. Lena's fingers trembled as she typed back a simple yes, then, taking a deep breath, she hit call. "Lena." "Oh, thank God. How was the flight? Is my handsome godson okay? Did you get any sleep?" Sarah's voice, warm and familiar and so incredibly normal, was almost enough to make her break down. "We're fine," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "The flight was eventful." "What do you mean eventful? Did someone get drunk and try to sing karaoke? Please tell me a video, something like that." She looked over at Min-jun. He was staring out his window, his face a mask of stone, but she knew he was listening to every word. How could she possibly explain this? "Hey, Sarah, so I accidentally fell asleep on a Korean Mafia boss, and now he sort of kidnapped me for my own protection. Listen, I can't really talk right now," Lena said, her heart aching with the understatement. "I'm in a car." "Whose car? Did your parents send a service?" "Lena, you sound weird. What's going on?" "I'll call you later. I promise. I love you." She hung up before Sarah could ask any more questions she couldn't answer. The silence in the car rushed back in, heavier than before. She was adrift, cut off from her old life, a passenger in the car of a man who was both her captor and her savior. The car glided through the gleaming, vibrant streets of Seoul before turning into a private, guarded driveway that wound its way up a hill. It stopped before a skyscraper of black glass and steel that pierced the night sky, a modern fortress overlooking the sprawling city below. They took a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse apartment. The space was breathtaking and brutally empty. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic, glittering view of Seoul. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and cold, all sharp angles and neutral colors. It wasn't a home, it was a statement. A beautiful, lonely cage. Mr. Park set her bags down by the door. An older woman with a kind, wrinkled face and sad eyes appeared, bowing to Min-jun. She was the housekeeper, Mrs. Kim. Min-jun spoke to her in rapid, low Korean, his words clearly instructions. Mrs. Kim nodded and then turned to Lena, her expression softening. She gestured towards a hallway. "For the baby," she said in careful, heavily accented English. Lena followed her into a pristine room that had clearly been prepared. A beautiful wooden crib stood in the corner, a changing table stocked with diapers and wipes beside it. It was all brand new, all top of the line. The efficiency was terrifying. How long had he known he would be bringing them here? Was this a contingency he always had ready? After she had settled a sleeping Sam into the crib, she walked back into the main living area. Min-jun was standing by the vast window, his back to her, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked like he belonged there, a king surveying his kingdom of light. He turned as she approached, his face unreadable in the dim light. "They saw you with me," he said, his voice quiet, finally offering an explanation. "Choi's faction has been looking for a weakness, a way to create leverage. He saw you, and he saw an opportunity." He took a slow sip of his drink. "By sitting next to me, by what happened on the plane, you became a tool he could use against my family. He would not have hesitated to harm you or your son to send me a message." Lena wrapped her arms around herself, a chill settling deep in her bones despite the warmth of the apartment. "So, what happens now?" "For now," he said, his gaze meeting hers across the sterile, beautiful room. "This is the safest place for you. You will stay here. You and your son will be protected." The words were meant to be reassuring, but they sounded like a sentence. He was the most powerful mafia boss in the city, and she was under his protection. She was also his prisoner. He had saved her from a wolf, only to lock her in a cage with a dragon. And the most terrifying part? Looking at him, at the quiet grief in his eyes, at the memory of his gentle hand on her sleeping child, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to be free. The lines had blurred, and in this dangerous new world, the only safety she could find was in the shadow of the man who was the greatest danger of all. What do you think she should do? Trust him or find a way to escape? Every choice is a risk, and we're just getting started.